I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Yes or no? Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
I had no prior knowledge of the planned assault on Nancy Kerrigan.
I am deeply sorry for my irresponsible and selfish behavior I engaged in.
Guys, welcome back to Oops, the podcast. Giulio Gallerati, joined as ever by Ryan. He's looking like he's in extremely good shape. Lynch.
Thank you.
How you doing, Lynch? Good to see
Well.
you. We have an extra special episode today, and I don't say that lightly. We have Max Towey here with us, who is the founder and whatever other titles you might have of RocaNews.
Supreme Chancellor
of RocaNews. Some of you guys may be familiar with it. As far as my perspective goes, you guys have sort of become popular for your sort of ability to narrow down the important news topics, whether it be of the day or the week or whatever, and make them digestible, no bullshit. And I know a lot of people who really like it, and I've been very impressed by it.
Well, thank you, man. We appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I know we've talked a lot about your travel content. Huge fan.
Love
it.
Man.
Places
Thank
you can't go. Shout out.
Appreciate it.
But yeah, it's what a time to be in news. I'll tell you that much.
For sure, bro. No, for sure. So, it's Tuesday now after the election when this episode is airing. And the reason why I say it's an extra special episode, I don't want to say we don't do politics. There's no rule about that. We just kind of don't typically talk about it. And, I think now that the dust has settled a bit, I am interested to just evaluate everything. Whether it be the election itself, the state of the country, et cetera, all this shit, I find to be fascinating. We had a great convo the other night about it, and it kind of planted the seed in my head that it would be great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny. We were just talking about right before we got on here how when you travel the country a lot and then you see how they vote, it's fascinating. Mm-hmm. And you see trend lines. And the country is insanely diverse. There are obviously patterns, rural, urban divides and how they vote, but every state is its own beast. And until you travel a lot, they kind of all blur.
Totally.
But they really are their own beast.
Yeah, because even with just traveling in general and understanding places in general, not even when it comes to voting, it's a very useful piece of the puzzle because you might have read everything about somewhere and you probably have a very good understanding if you've done that.
Yeah.
But it is very helpful, even just from a vibe perspective, the things that you'll soak in visiting some of these places that you've heard about, it kind of ties it all together.
Totally. It ties it together. And also you remember even within a place, you might start to get in this mindset of this is a red area. Like Florida, for example, has moved super rightward. It's kind of stunning to have grown up in the state where you assume Dade County, where Miami is, will perpetually be dark blue. And now it's safely red. It's kind of a bizarre change. But even, I was talking to my family in Jacksonville, and there are a lot of neighbors and people in their community who want to leave the country. And that's a red area. You drive by and you'd be and then here, you're kind of it's a blue area and people are wearing 47 hats,
Right.
I'm kind of surprised by how many people are, frankly.
Yeah, totally.
So it's even within places, it's pretty nuanced.
Yeah. Max has traveled to 40 states, not a piker.
There we go. Yeah.
On this show, we make a big push to everybody who listens to try to be as adventurous as possible.
My national park count, though, is embarrassing. You would hate that, dude.
You just you'd be surprised at how many things are national parks, though.
Really?
You maybe have been to more than you think.
Wow.
Even in just the city, for example, Christopher Street, that Stonewall area, national park.
That's a national park.
So
let's go.
Probably close to your apartment.
Yeah, there you go.
Also, the Statue of Liberty.
Statue of Liberty.
Governor's Island.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
That counts.
And then we have to get into technicalities here as to whether or not that counts, but maybe a different conversation.
Okay. Isn't it technically in New Jersey, right?
I
think it is.
I think you might be right. I don't know.
Weird.
I don't know for sure, but it's a good.
All right, we'll look into that.
Lynch, can you check that out for us? Okay, so in the meantime, there's a couple things specifically that stood out to me about your guys' sort of election stance. So I had a couple aha moments even looking through your stuff. I was like, oh, wow. One thing was you guys had a carousel up about how RocaNews did not endorse either candidate and how maybe you guys think that why are news outlets endorsing candidates? And it's an interesting point because even some of the places that I will go to for my news, whether it be like The Economist, I read a lot of Foreign Policy Mag, or just like the traditional news outlets tend to endorse people. And it might be kind of obvious as to why, but I definitely want to hear more about how you guys arrived on that.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, I do love your media diet where it's like the BBC, Foreign Policy Mag, The Economist. You take out your morning spectacles, check it. But I think a lot of people, when they hear that, they're kind of bummed in a sense because today we are living in a hyper polarized country. And there are a lot of people in the middle, but some people view the 24 election as an existential moment. Are we going to give in to tyranny? And their definition of tyranny means either blue or red, depending on their side. So I think it's hard because people are like, this is the time to take a stand. This is the time to say you stand up for democracy or you stand up for free speech in the Constitution. This is the time to take a stand. And I think that is super counterproductive. And it misunderstands the fundamental role of news companies. Sure, there is a history of newspapers endorsing, but I think in a moment where news is historically distrusted, that you cannot openly show your partisan allegiances. And that's exactly what an endorsement would do. And also, I think people are tired of being told what to think. If we were in a moment where there was a shortage of hot takes and opinion pieces, think pieces about what's going on in the country or podcasts telling you what to think, then maybe news companies should take more of this paternal role, which makes me cringe because I think most people can think for themselves. But but I don't think we're there right now. I think we're, we have a podcast called We the 66 where we do deep dives on different subjects, and that stands for 66% of people don't trust the news, which is the truth, based on a Pew survey. That's a lot of people. That's 2 out of 3 people. That's people who are members of a party that don't trust the news. So when you're there and then you say, here's who you should vote for, I think it blurs all the other coverage you do because it shows where you stand, and B, I don't think it's productive at all.
Right. And so the first thing that stands out to me is like, it's productive to be sort of nonpartisan because people can hear what the outlet thinks are the important stories without emotion, without bias. We're supposed to be reporting the news without bias anyway, but by endorsing a candidate, I am saying I have a bias, XYZ.
Right.
So in theory, in a world where news was nonpartisan purely, everybody would be getting their news from the same place. And instead what ends up happening is suddenly, and the algorithm doesn't help with any of this, you are only seeing and perpetuating the things that you think, the things you think. And some of it might need context, some of it might not, whatever. But like context is helpful. And context that is factual and straightforward and true is helpful because a lot of the times, reading between the lines helps, and a good starting point is a place where you can get all of the information.
There have been 2 trends, the 2 ways most news companies have grown and make their money that are not conducive to good journalism, in my opinion. One is the algorithms, as you said, which previously was BuzzFeed trying to get a bunch of clicks on Facebook, playing the Google search trends. And now it's more cross social media. But the point is, to get seen and to go viral online, you need to have alarmist or some sort of extreme coverage that makes people go, whoa, I got to check this out. I got to share it. And over time that became, you sort of up the ante more and more and more and more. And people realize what gets clicks. Let's feed them more of that. Let's feed them culture war. Let's feed them Trump stories. Let's feed them opinion pieces. Let's feed the hottest stuff we have, because anything that's inside voice level or room temperature, that's not going to get clicks. And then the other one is even subscription, which I think people thought would beat this trend. But what's happened is a lot of people have found their flock and they just give them what they want in a different way. And it's kind of like the New York Times, which, has probably the best journalism in the country in terms of its capabilities. I'm not talking about its voice and sort of it's like bias free. I don't think it is bias free at all. But
you don't think it's what?
Bias free. I think
right.
It clearly has a bend. Just you look at its journalists, you look at its audiences. But what's happened is I think it's even moved left because they know who their audience is. It tends to be coastal, educated, well-off people who tend to be very liberal. So what's going to get more subscriptions when they bet their... they almost went out of business in 2009. The New York Times had to sell their building, their office building. They had to take out debt. And now they're doing incredibly well. But one reason they're doing incredibly well is they found that giving a generally liberal audience what they want to hear is a good business model.
Right. That makes sense. Well, Well, I guess, dude, like I'm curious. I want to talk about the election.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to beat around the bush too much here. This is all fascinating shit. But you know, and I'll put this out there. I voted for Kamala. I have no problem with saying that. You know, the election didn't work out how I wanted to. I don't necessarily or think it's the end of the world. I don't think it's the end of the world, to be honest. And there are certain things that I, you know, hope, because if you think about it this way, like the first time around, or the last couple of times around, if we're going to do that, first time we were shocked that Trump sort of beat the polls so distinctly and so decisively. We were like, oh, that hasn't happened in our lifetime. What's going on? Then he loses the election. He sort of refuses to concede defeat. He's sort of a sore loser about it. He doesn't show up when they swear in the new president, which is all stuff that like kind of sucks, but maybe it's just noise, right? Maybe it doesn't matter. But the idea that maybe there was like pressure on our institutions and like some of the things that really do make this country so great, that gives me anxiety. So as a voter, to me, things remaining how they've been is appealing to me. Now, maybe that is a privilege to be able to say that. You know what I mean? Being a person who lives in New York City, I think there's been a bit of an urbanization the past however many years, 30, 40 years, whatever, where it just makes more sense to be in a place that's like more densely sort of blossoming with opportunity, all that stuff, right? So there's clearly been changes in a lot of different things. And I'm not saying, I'm sure people have their reasons for voting for Trump. Some of them are probably just traditional reasons for voting Republican. Probably a lot. You know what I mean? There's obviously a whole new batch of red voters as well. That's an interesting phenomenon. But a lot of the time, I like to think that people have their reasons and maybe they're good reasons. And while maybe Trump won't solve their problems, I to some degree understand the appeal of an anti-establishment guy when the establishment has not worked out for you.
Totally.
So I guess that's sort of my... I don't there was a lot in there.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I mean, a lot to say on that. The first thing is we predicted what happened. I think the receipts are on YouTube because we went around the swing states and interviewed voters all over the state. I mean, for Pennsylvania, for example, which was the most important swing state, 19 electoral votes, and it's traditionally the bellwether. Recently, it has been. You go to the hood in Philly, you go to the wealthy suburbs, you go to coal country, you go to steel country, you go to Pittsburgh, you go to the poor parts, the rich parts, you go to everywhere in between. It's a vast, incredibly diverse state. And so you go all over, and a couple things jumped out that ended up being trends that propelled Trump to victory. Number one, the minority shift was real. That kind of surprised me. The number of Latinos and black voters who were going for Trump or not voting was palpable on the ground. And I know they're like, well, don't assume too much from the random combos you have. It wasn't random. And it was, you also can kind of feel out energy of a place. And that was one thing that jumped out immediately. So that shift wasn't surprising. I got a fact for you that you might find interesting because I know you spent some time in Wisconsin, but Trump lost the 65 and up vote by double digits, which used to be his base. He won the 18 to 24 vote by double digits.
Wow.
How crazy is that? Imagine in 2016 if someone told you, and this is a city that has Milwaukee, Madison, the birthplace of progressivism, college town, government town, and Milwaukee, it's like its two population hubs.
Right.
Like, isn't that crazy to you that 18 to 24 flipped?
So like we're starting to talk about this, and this is something that I'm curious about. So this obviously qualifies, but I'm curious about, in general, what things stood out to you guys as surprising, as things that were decisive factors. I want to talk more about this one first, but in your head, if you can start
absolutely
multitasking and
sir.
compiling. So I've heard that sort of the Gen Z voters all tended to be sort of like Trump leaning. To what degree does sort of like popular media play into that with like podcasts and comedians? Like, how influential was that? Is there some other sort of broad thing that needs to be investigated? Like, what do you guys think about that?
It's a great question. I mean, I'm working on a piece on that right now, actually, because there was so much noise beforehand. We were like, is the Tony Hinchcliffe joke gonna be a big factor? Are the celebrity endorsements gonna be a big factor? And to what degree did Trump's like podcast tour, would that be effective? And you think about Kamala Harris, she did do some podcasts. She did Call Her Daddy, obviously. She did, I think, like some more TikTok shows. She obviously did more TV. But Trump hit the podcast bro circuit hard. I mean,
Yeah.
he hit it. Theo Vaughn, Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan, Bussin' with the Boys.
Did he do Nelk Boys too?
Nelk
He's
Boys
done it
Full
before.
Send. He did. I mean, the number of podcasts. He did a stream with Aiden Ross. He was
The crypto people love him,
The crypto people love him,
which
He
is
did
pretty
Impulsive.
straightforward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Trump. And he impulsive and got like a Jake Paul to basically become a surrogate. The crypto thing, I do feel, which is kind of I'm sure our founding fathers would have loved that aspect of our democracy today. But he hit it super hard, and I do think he like figured out some things that would hit, like the crypto thing, and I think he also it played to his strengths. People like Trump. I know that's going to make some people go crazy. A lot of people like
Yeah.
Trump.
And I was thinking that too, as I was trying to wrap my head around sort of the appeal of him beyond, okay, you're a wealthy person and you don't want to pay taxes. Okay, fine, straightforward. Even like if you're from a Rust Belt state and now you have the same job, you actually make less than you used to, and prices went up if you even have a job.
Yeah.
Those people have had their back turned on them by the establishment. Okay, obvious that that maybe Trump is appealing to you. And someone might say, well, what does he have in common with them? Well, I'll tell you what he has in common with them. That he is a guy that the establishment has tried to keep out of the mix, and he's been, brave, and he has sort of stuck with it, and he has overcome all these obstacles. And I think that like people relate to that, and they like that. And I don't know, like you said, I think people just fucking like the guy, dude.
They also, I mean, like when he was with Theo Vaughn, and there's that exchange of him talking about Theo Vaughn's cocaine addiction. And it kind of humanized him in a way where, again, it doesn't matter whether this is correct reading. I think this is just the reading a lot of people had. It's hard to like take the depiction of him as a fascist in some corners of the media and then see him making people laugh and laughing for 3 hours. I mean, his Joe Rogan interview had 40 million views. I bet, I don't think people have caught up to that. And that's 3 hours. That's basically an AFC championship worth of views for a presidential interview. It's kind of crazy to think about.
And, people are like, so you get the big celebrity endorsements for Kamala, but like, I think people are like, so I don't have anything in common with these people.
Yeah.
Trump is the guy who speaks to me.
Yeah.
Whether or not what his agenda is, what he really wants, all that aside, like that seems to be what he's been able to do successfully.
And he's, on the one hand, nothing relatable to the average person. He's a billionaire. Even though he has a Christian vote, his marital track record doesn't kind of line up with what they want
Christian
and what
values.
they preach, the values. But he also, I think when he does that McDonald's thing, I think he is enjoying it. And I think he does love fast food. And people are so tired of the polished, scripted, sort of inauthentic politician. Now, you may think Trump's awful and all these things and that he lies and he's terrible with the people around him. But I think people hate politicians now, which is why someone like Jeb Bush might have won 20 years ago.
Right.
But like now with anger where it is, he's talking over people. They don't care about policy. They want you to go burn down the swamp.
Right.
That's what they want.
So yeah, exactly. And I also wonder about this because there is sort of like a poster child for either party that probably doesn't widely represent the party. And I wonder about that a bit. Because I think in general, while you'll hear people do interviews and you'll hear them say stuff and you're like, okay, well, like that's sort of not true. And you could also make the argument, you're like, all right, all these voters who say they support Trump, like this is the guy who tried to vote to make it that insurance policies don't have to cover them with pre-existing conditions. That objectively does not work in their favor. But maybe they don't care. Maybe they're like, I'm fucked anyway, dude.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care. Like this guy's going to change stuff. This guy's going to, will he? I don't know.
Yeah.
This narrative that like the economy's in shambles, like I think maybe that's a thing that depending on who you're talking to might be true or not. I mean, the economy's grown 4 consecutive years.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time it's cyclical anyway. Whoever's the president just is there at that time and they get the credit or not, like a quarterback.
Don't you think that's so true of like when we look at presidents, so much of it was outside their control. And they just get
so often.
So often. And just one thing on that point on the economy, I do think one thing that fed the rage when you talk about, and this was especially true among minority voters, and I think that you may not see this in the Washington Post, but I can tell you this made a lot of people angry, was the migrant situation. And I always wondered that, like, why do people in rural Alabama or suburban Michigan care so much about the migrant situation? besides, whatever the images in the sense that like one of our borders is totally porous. I guess like that's one. But I think if you're poor and you're on your evening commute in the Bronx, like that's one thing we have to talk about is the flip in the Northeast. That's one of the craziest things I saw. So that was one thing that came in my head. But if you're on your evening commute to your apartment in the Bronx that is small, you're on your second shift of the day, you go home and you see a Venezuelan migrant leave the grocery store having just swiped the debit card they got from the government.
As they go into their hotel room.
To their hotel room. How does that not make you rageful?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't let asylum seekers into the country. It's another one of those observations on how people feel, not what we think. Right. And that is something that has made people enraged, especially in the Rust Belt where driving through these places, it's sad. Like these places used to be the hubs. Pittsburgh and Detroit were like Silicon Valley back in the day. Yeah. I mean, and everything around them was great. And now the mansions are covered with grass and you're like, I think I get the appeal.
Yeah.
I really do.
Right.
Or the rage, I should say.
Yeah, right.
This episode of Oops the Podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp.
BetterHelp, man. Well, first of all, I like to say shout out to Hill Dog, my wonderful fiance, soon to be wife.
Not for long.
I know. Who, to be honest, anytime I have a problem or I have something I want to talk through, I just feel very comfortable talking to her about it. And I don't feel it's going to kind of like allow her to get within the facade and see things about me I don't want her to see. Like I feel like she understands me and I feel like it's very valuable. But even with that, dude, I still think that there's so much value to having therapy. And that's why I'm so grateful to BetterHelp as well. It's nice to have a solid, easy, convenient, and sort of like methodical way to approach therapy, which I think BetterHelp gives you throughout the entire process, whether it's the onboarding where you sort of go through a pretty detailed, albeit fairly brief questionnaire to help them figure out who's right for you, but it also helps you figure out who's right for you. As you're sitting there being like, oh, I guess this matters to me. Oh, I guess I haven't thought of that. To me, that was like the most helpful thing. And from there, you are paired with some matches where you can kind of choose. And some of the people they suggest, you can kind of see what their specialties are. There are overlaps there, but so it's easy to kind of narrow down to the person that you might want. And from there, if you end up deciding it's not a proper fit, you can change so easily, which is really the biggest highlight over brick and mortar therapy, where you show up at a place, there's one guy available, and now that's just your guy. That's been my experience in the past. And then it's awkward to like not go to him anymore. You feel like you owe them something, and it's like, maybe that's not the right way to think, but it's way easier to do it when you just click a button and you never see the person again. That's all I gotta say. So regardless of what's going on in your life, if you think that you need somebody to talk to, or if you're not even sure, like I would honestly say give it a shot. And BetterHelp's a great way to try it out.
Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/oops today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/oops.
So I want to talk more about that too, but I've to a point that I wanted to make earlier, like the poster child of either party. I don't know how accurately that maybe represents either party, and I wonder about that. Like, so for the right, they have the horn-wearing January 6th guy, and for the left, it's like a blue-haired, Emily, androgynous.
Yeah, exactly.
Which feels that feels pretty counterproductive too. I can't imagine that either of those prototypes represent the broader population. A lot of these people are seasoned voters. You know what I mean? So I kind of wonder about that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe just an observation. As far as the immigrant stuff goes, I mean, it's interesting because the migrant policy for both parties is similar.
Yeah.
So, I don't get, and this is just politics as usual. It's like, okay, Trump's a liar, Trump this, Trump's that. Yeah. I agree that he's probably more of those things. He's more provocative than maybe some of his predecessors, but all the politicians do this. They will tell you one thing and it will not reflect whatever is the reality. That's part of politics. Now, they have a very similar policy, so it's crazy that that Trump was able to so successfully sort of use that to his advantage. I did also see though that in the exit polls that like people's main voting stuff, like immigration was like kind of further down, but still like 10 to 20%, which maybe could have been decisive in the group of people you're talking about. And as far, I've heard this too, like people who moved here and now are legal hate illegal immigrants more than anybody.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
I'm part of the club now. Fuck you. You know?
Pulling this ladder up. But I think that is so true. I mean, that last point. Also on the like types you were talking about, where it's like the January 6th QAnon shaman, whatever that guy's name was, and then more of the blue haired, protesting everything, barista type. I think there are those caricatures, obviously, but it is just laughable. And I think if you really think the other side is like that, you need fresh air. And again, it doesn't mean there's nobody like that. And there are like places where it's more common. If you go to rural Kentucky, you're going to get a little more QAnon. If you go to Portland, downtown, you're probably going to get more of the other type. But I mean, you really need fresh air if you think people are like that who vote the other side.
Yeah. And to what degree, like, there's some of these sort of stances that people talk about here that I think are very valuable things, just as far as the conversation about reproductive rights and some of the things that people have been like posting a lot about. And I totally understand that, and I agree with it. So why is that not important enough to make a difference?
That's a great question. I mean, it's funny. Like, even though we thought Trump would win in a landslide and win all 7 swing states, I thought that this was the one wild card issue, because in 2022, the red wave didn't happen in the midterms. And I think the main reason why were some of these issues. And similarly, in 23 and also 22, there were some states, including like Kansas, Kentucky, and Montana, red states, that shot down an abortion ban or something like they were going to enshrine abortion as a right in their state constitution, or as not a right. And they shot it down. So they took more of a pro-choice side. And so that was in the back of your head, like, maybe this will drive turnout. I think in a lot of places, though, I think a lot of people did start to buy that Trump wouldn't support a national abortion ban. And I think they also thought their state wouldn't change it. And I think some people, don't get me wrong, for a lot of people it was the number one issue. It was the number one issue, especially in suburban areas and places with a lot of young people. And that was a top issue, don't get me wrong. In some places it was all we heard. But I think it was also a bit of a class divide, where in the countryside or in poorer towns, black or white towns or Hispanic towns, you would hear a lot more about inflation as the number one issue or cultural issues. And then you'd go to a wealthier spot. And I think it is a bit of a class component. It doesn't mean it's like a class privilege at all. That's again an observation. I don't know. I mean, the Christian fabric of a lot of states kind of explains why they more evangelical or conservative Catholic, why they're pro-life. It's a great question. I think also a lot of people, I don't think Trump, by the way, cares that much about this issue, and I think some people sniff that out. I think J.D. Vance very much does. I think he's ardently pro-life. I don't think Trump's pro-choice at all. Like, I don't think in his private life he's been, and I don't think he cares.
Wait, you mean pro-life at all?
Sorry, yeah, I don't think he's exactly right. I don't think he's pro-life.
Yeah. Right.
I think he's kind of been like, it kind of reminds me on these podcasts, like he doesn't seem to be a conspiracy guy at all, besides maybe election stuff. But when it comes to like aliens, or Epstein, but he's learned that people like in the Rogan audience love that stuff. So he just sort of throws the red meat out there. Like he'll bring it up. I think that's kind of how he views it.
Interesting.
Interesting. He's not interested in the JFK assassination,
right.
But everyone brings it up with him. And he's like, I'll absolutely release. You wouldn't believe what's in there. And like, he'll just say that stuff.
Right.
And because he doesn't care, but they do.
Right.
What do you think? What do you think? You travel the country. Why do you think it plays more in Brooklyn or New York or I don't know?
I don't know that I know the answer.
Yeah.
I think maybe it just doesn't matter enough to people, like to your point. Because like what were you saying before about the economy, right?
Yeah.
Like people being like, in this economy, you look on paper, you're like, well, in this economy, the economy continues to grow. We're still the richest country. Yeah. But that statement can still be true for people. Because to your point, inflation just happens, right? Yeah. That's going to happen. And if people are not making more money, that affects them, right? Yeah. So like that statement about things being tough and in the state of the country or whatever, like that can be true for someone and not true for someone else. Right. So maybe it's one of those things where like even how caring about the environment is sort of a privilege, or being able to invest money in the arts is a privilege because it means that there's political stability, this, that. Maybe that's one of those things too, where maybe like people are just worried about other shit.
Totally.
Because to me, it matters a lot. And it upsets me to like have women in my life who are upset about it. And I understand like the idea that if I were a woman, there's some fucking guy telling me what I can do.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, dude?
Yeah.
Like, fuck you.
Yeah.
But, so, I feel strongly about that for sure. But, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's also a sense, I think, for people who are very anxious and scared about this issue, just from a objective political sense. I don't think it's a popular one for the Republicans. I think the pro-life movement proved to be mostly a failure. I mean, in one sense, it got Roe overturned, but in terms of popular opinion, most Americans support some abortion. That's just the fact. And you can argue about how late we go. It's true that some on the left support a longer window than even in the most liberal European countries. Now, I think the liberal counter argument is they tend to have better healthcare and detection, but still, I think there's probably like some middle ground where I think most Americans come down. So I would just say I don't think it's going to be Handmaid's Tale on this issue. I think it's going to be actually like not a lot of movement. I think some states might have like out their laws, and then if Trump pushes it too hard, he's going to get shellacked in the 26 midterms because he brings people to the polls, but I don't think the Republican platform brings many people to the polls. It's funny. It's like I think the most encouraging thing for people who are down today is something that's not good about the country, which is that it's pretty dysfunctional legislatively. Like, I just don't even know how much, like, even with the Elon Musk in the Department of Government Efficiency and RFK getting some of the health stuff, I don't even know how much they'll be able to do. I think DC's a different beast. We know someone very well who is a longtime, very successful banker, and then he went to work for the Biden administration. He's still there. And the way he talks about the government, it makes you think like not much is going to change. And
that is always an important notion, because it's like, there's this illusion of choice, right? To some degree. And in some ways that's a positive thing, because you don't want things to drastically change. You don't want, we're lucky that, knock on wood, this is not a place where typically people are taking to the streets and protest like they are in Mozambique right now because their elections are all fucked up. You know what I mean? We are new enough that we're not sort of like bogged down by some of this weird traditional stuff. And we are developed enough that we have these solid institutions in place. That gives me comfort.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think the media does a lot to undermine certain institutions. Like, I'll give you one example, the Supreme Court. I'm not going to get into the Clarence Thomas allegations and the Alito and the fact that it's 6-3. And I generally am someone who believes it's healthy when you have a balance of power, and that like too skewed of a court, I don't think will be good for the country. But I also think the media will never cover the most Supreme Court cases are like 8-1 or 9-0.
Right.
And that kind of gives you hope. There are definitely, obviously, some huge agreements. There have been some where they expected the conservative decision to come down, and it didn't this cycle. So if you pay close attention, you might have a little more faith in some of these institutions. Again, I'm not saying that Clarence Thomas gets an A+ for ethics over the last 3 years, but I just think that you can also, I think if the media were going for more unifying stories or more of that, like, lower the temperature stories, we'd be in a better place.
Literally, even when it comes to like global warming.
Yeah.
Please tell us some of the good stuff, because there's some positive news.
Totally.
I know that now this is the longest we've ever been above 1.5 Celsius for an extended period of time, which doesn't sound good to me. But anytime I hear something kind of good, where it's like, it's not too late, it gives me so much comfort. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, the temperature right now is crazy, but you're so right. Like, and I think that people are afraid of it because here's a weird cycle that I think we're in. And I think this was true on COVID. I think it's true on climate issues as well, where the establishment and some of the scientists in government hate that a lot of people don't believe in climate change. And they're kind of like, you guys got to believe in it. So what they'll do is they'll hide stuff. They'll be worried about giving nuance, just like in COVID, where they're afraid that most people don't think this virus is real or deadly. So they're going to hide stuff. But then that discredits them, because I think it's just this cycle of, now I trust you even less and less and
Right,
less
right,
and
right,
less.
right,
And I
right.
think COVID hurt the establishment because there were a bunch of noble lies, they'd call them, and there were a bunch of things said confidently. That
And when
proved
you
to be
say
wrong.
noble lies, I think it's important to specify because I know what you mean. But like,
Yeah.
say, okay, the climate change is a thing. Let's
Yeah.
say we all agree it's a thing, and the people who don't, maybe they don't care. Maybe they're like, well, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna fucking die poor.
Yeah,
so
right,
that's more
right.
important to me than the
Right,
climate.
right.
But
Right.
so it's like easy to sort of highlight the things that are bad to make us worried, so that we don't sort of rest on our laurels and just assume it's going to be okay. So that is a noble lie. If I start telling you
Absolutely
too much
right.
good stuff, you're not going to try
Absolutely.
as hard to do the right thing.
Absolutely. But I think the problem too is not just the distrust, it's that you feel powerless. If there's no progress we've made, because it feels like, I don't know, we've done a lot, we've changed a lot. California's banning the sale of new gas-powered cars as soon as like 2030 or 2035. Like there's a lot that's changing, the way houses are regulated, water pressure, temperature, all that. There have been like some water rationing measures taken. Like we've done a lot, and more on the individual level, like grocery bags, all that. Like we've done a lot. And if you've done all that and you're like, we haven't made a single dent, I mean, what are we going to do? I mean,
Right,
Taylor
right.
Swift flies on a private jet a lot. Like, what are we going to do? You know,
Totally.
should that be banned? Like,
Right.
So anyways, I think, you know, maybe give some good news. And also one thing I think of a lot is like Florida's a very red state, but I think we also can do this issue in a way that is bipartisan. Like Florida does care about the environment a lot. I know that might surprise people, but like Ron DeSantis, a key part of his platform was the red tide issue and other environmental preservation issues, where protecting wetlands and all that. Like they really care about the environment in Florida, my home state. So I think it's also good to like not make it a one-side issue, because you're not going to win the country if that happens.
Totally do.
Spark something uncommon this holiday with just the right gift from Uncommon Goods. Julia, I've been on the website
It's the best.
today, just getting ready for, you know, as soon as November 1st comes around, instantly holiday season. When I came to visit last week, all the holiday lights were up in Greenpoint.
yeah.
And
Season's greetings, baby.
and so it's time to get ahead on those gift givings. And you can get something common and basic, or you can check out Uncommon Goods, where they really have the most amazing custom gifts that can be tailored to your friends and loved ones. I'm looking right now, and
a lot of cool customizable stuff in here too, unique stuff. It's a great place to look for gifts.
they have a personalized word search throw blanket. And that's something I could get for Victoria, because we love to do the New York Times games at night.
Yes.
And I think it's called Strands is the game. So that's a really cute, and you get to customize it with whatever words you want. So everything on this website, you can tailor it to the person receiving the gift, and it's actually really, really meaningful. So
Yeah, you know what's happened to me the last few years too, which is a little bit of a bummer. Like, say I go on Amazon and I'm looking for gifts, like I've sort of exhausted all the things. There's like not new stuff. So anytime I go looking for gifts, I've given all this stuff already. I've run out of stuff. You don't have that problem in Uncommon Goods. Like, what about this, Lynch? MLB ballpark map glasses. It's a good gift for you. Little
that's
Yankee
really
Stadium,
nice. Yeah.
Little Yankee Stadium action.
Yeah. That's a good way for me to say I love you to my dad without saying I love you. So
What about this one? Message shortbread cookies.
yeah.
Customizable. I'll give some to you, Lynch. Be like, hey, Lynchy.
Hey.
Hey,
It's
big
just
boy.
not-
Hey, big boy.
Thank you, big
You
boy.
want to eat yourself? Yeah. You gonna eat yourself?
It's just I don't know if I'm uncomfortable or aroused or both, but the point of the matter is that everything is custom. It's thoughtful, and no matter your budget, Uncommon Goods is something that you can be really excited to give to whoever you want to give it to.
And to clarify, before you give the last example, it doesn't have to be customizable. In case that's something that sounds intimidating to you, there's all sorts of stuff on here. A lot of great custom stuff, but a lot of great stuff that you order, and that's all the work you have to do also.
Yeah, the last one that I'll mention right now, they have a personalized dog blueprint. As if it was the architecture blueprint for any building in the city. It's actually the DNA of Dusty.
Oh, bless his heart.
So, I mean, that's such a sweet gift. So
Very, very sweet, man.
So right now, to get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/oops. That's uncommongoods.com/oops. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary.
So I have another question now, which I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, but give it a little backstory. So Big G, my dad, you know, as silly as he can be, he is a kind of staunch liberal. He always has been. And I've always really respected his opinion because it's very substantive. Like, he can basically explain why he thinks something extremely well. And we were talking about this at dinner the other night, but if somebody's around who's saying something stupid, he always can very quickly pull concise facts that just like immediately undermine something that's stupid that people are saying. So I've sort of always respected his opinion, and I've looked to him to sort of help shape my worldview a lot, and maybe not specifically from like a polarization perspective, but it's helped me like learn how to learn.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
So I think that a lot of the time, I like to think that I'm able to sort of like siphon through different information fairly well. You know, I'm not an expert by any means, but so this is the question that I have. To what degree, say that there was a Republican president in 2016 and it was not Trump, and say there was a Republican president for the upcoming year who was not Trump, would the Supreme Court situation be exactly the same? Or would it be different based on who was nominated and how sort of extreme leaning they are or might not be? Like, what do you think about that?
That's a great question. I mean, it's hard to say. I think if the Republicans had different leadership, I mean, it's not just Trump. Like, I do think there are a number of grievances on both sides that like stand out to me that I still get upset about. Like Mitch McConnell blocking the Merrick Garland nomination in 2016, like April or whatever, was dumb. That was really bad. Like if the Republican Party were different then and he didn't do that, that was just a blatant like screw this, the way things work here.
Would he do that now?
I bet so. And like here's one thing that kind of is frustrating. RBG and Antonin Scalia, who are, if you don't know, RBG obviously a very left-leaning justice, Antonin Scalia a very right-leaning justice. They were also, by the way, very good friends outside robes, when robes were off. That sounds weird, but when the
robes come off, they're really good friends.
But yeah, when the robes, I don't know how you'd say that with Supreme Court justices, but they were confirmed. I want to say this is right by a combined. You know how like every Supreme Court confirmation vote is now like 51-49. It was like 97-1 and 98-0 for them. Like it was that lopsided.
Got it.
But so it used to be where in the criteria of a Supreme Court justice is not do you agree with their takes. It's do you think they're fit to serve as a judge? I can't remember the exact language, but it's something like that.
But you conveniently nominate people who sort of align with your party's values.
Totally. And that is annoying. So
that's all a timing thing.
And I think that it is all a timing thing. And I think they're probably going to, like, if the two justices, Thomas and Alito or whatever, step down, they'll have two more for a long period of time. But the point is, and I think it's become so shamelessly political because of things like Mitch McConnell, where people are like, oh, we're going to play dirty now. You guys play dirty.
Right.
And so it's become really, really, really aggressive in that front. But anyways, I think to your question, like if Jeb Bush became president, he probably would have gone more moderate, but like Neil Gorsuch is pretty moderate by any measure. Amy Coney Barrett less so, but they wanted a woman. But like she's not as moderate. Kavanaugh obviously was a political firestorm, but he's not that extreme. Like they have an index that shows how extreme justices are.
Who's the most extreme one?
I think Alito or Thomas and Sotomayor on the left, and then I think Alito and Thomas on the right. I haven't looked at that in a bit, but anyway. So to your question on the Supreme Court, I think if Trump weren't there, there'd probably be a little more trust in institutions, but. I also totally get people who don't trust a big government and B kind of like the administrative state we have. Like I grew up in Florida, but also lived in DC area. The fact that 4 of the 5 wealthiest counties border DC is insane to me.
Right.
And that's like, we do have a sprawling government. It's very corrupt. It's based on lobbying, not very, very corrupt, but like it has aspects of corruption to it. And so I kind of get people who are like, I want you to make some noise in there.
Totally,
break some China.
So that brings up an interesting point to me. So there's this term being tossed around, majoritarian nationalism.
That's the one you were saying, yeah.
This is the one where, you know, it's effectively populism, right? It's like you appeal to this kind of like broad majority of people who feel like they're in the they are at risk of becoming a minority. Now, how does this happen? I think there's a variety of ways that it happens. And when people point out how much they dislike Trump, I think it's important to remember how it became possible that somebody like him could be so successful. And you have to look to some of the things that we've been talking about where, these large groups of people used to live better. They used to live better. And, it's the whole argument about sort of like massaging the middle class and taking care of them. And it feels like there is that class divide in a way that's more extreme than it has been in the past when things were better. I don't know how you fix this. I don't know that anybody has the answer, to be honest.
Right.
Definitely not Trump.
I agree with that.
But that's all to say where it's like a country like India who has a similar kind of leader who has really leaned into the Hindu nationalism thing. And he's always sort of been that. Like that makes people happy. And like, it feels like that type of thing works much better in a system with a big class divide where it's like underdeveloped countries that have like a small, rich elite. And then this sort of like big population of people who aren't doing as well. The one interesting caveat here is that Trump actually benefits rich people still. So it's this weird, interesting thing where like, which the Republicans have always masterfully done, where it's like they cater to this small group of people and they kind of take on a bunch of other things for this broader group of people that might not actually help them necessarily. But I don't even want to say they think it helps them, but they just campaign on the things that they care about. Right?
100%. I totally agree with your line that we don't know how to fix it. Like, for example, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, the Rust Belt, Indiana, all across. Yeah, I'm thinking two swing state. Like that whole entire region that used to have a ton of really good manufacturing jobs and a lot of good white collar jobs in their towns, booming towns, great communities, people going to church. And it sounds like a Norman Rockwell painting, but like people going to church on Sunday, town storefronts all full, all that. Like they used to be vibrant town. That all left. And I don't know a single good economic platform that would revitalize that. Would tariffs bring manufacturing jobs back? Yes, maybe. Would it cause inflation? Yes, maybe. Like there are all these debates, I think. But the point is, I think Trump acted like he cared. And I think no matter how many campaign visits someone like Kamala made to those areas, that they don't think she cared. She's from Northern California.
Right.
They felt like she's probably a pretty scripted politician. And by the way, if I was thinking about this, like what would you say to like the Democratic campaign managers on how they could have done a better job? It felt like they didn't even care that over 100,000 people die from opioid deaths a year. And I'm not saying Trump's this guy who stays up at night thinking about that. Spoiler, he doesn't. But at least he like goes there and pretends like it. And he had JD Vance like that. To me,
does she not also do that though? Does she not go and pretend she cares?
Well, I think
does it just come off as insincere?
I think from day one, Trump made that core to his platform. Like the Ohio, Michigan former union voters who would go to him, and he gives like the working class populist appeal. I think she was less involved on that. I think she was more kind of like she's in with Hollywood. He's not. He's like the opposite. He calls out corruption all the time. She seems to be like, I don't think probably a lot of people love Doug Emhoff in Wisconsin. I don't think he relates to them a lot. He's an entertainment lawyer from Los Angeles who, is eating in nice restaurants and friends with movie stars. I think that she was rated like the most liberal senator a couple cycles ago.
Did Trump not also do that? There's so like for years Trump was hanging with the Hollywood people and the elites. Like, is that just like a shift now in his identity? Now he's been shunned by them.
It's so funny though, because I feel like to be appreciated by them, your background doesn't even matter that much. And that's the great contradiction with Trump that I think Chappelle discussed pretty well in the SNL monologue a couple years ago, where it's kind of like he was part of that, but he also left the house and said, here's what's going on in there. And calling out Hillary Clinton on stage saying, I used to give money to her campaign, which is like objectively a dumb thing to say. You're basically like, I'm running against you and I used to donate to them. She came to my kids' weddings. Like, it's so absurd. But I think people were like, that is what's going on back there. But I don't think that's a full answer. I get what you're saying. You're like, I'm saying that my observation is people think she's inauthentic and doesn't get working class. I think people also probably thought her like campaign videos that were made by a bunch of like 25-year-olds in DC about like picking Doritos and other stuff. Like it just felt fake to them. Whereas like Trump does love fast food. Trump does love wrestling. Trump does like porn stars. Trump kind of appeals to this like baseline. I don't mean to caricature the Rust Belt as people who only like those things.
He's just like a bro. Like people fucking like the guy.
Exactly.
Like I like this guy. He's like he taps into parts of people's personalities. This is what it seems like to me, that they either identify with or wish that they had more of.
Yeah.
You know, fuck you, everybody. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Trudging forward. Every time they try to take him down, it just makes him stronger.
Totally.
And he's just such an anomaly. It's just fucking
I was
fascinating.
watching a speech of his this morning, and I just made me think like he always goes off teleprompter because like he doesn't like normal speak, so he'll just like insert a bunch of ridiculous, you know, or just like change the word. It's really insane. So he just can't even play the normal politician that people have come to loathe. They hate the normal politician. I will say this. I saw an Atlantic writer, a guy named Tom Nichols, who's like very establishment DC, neocon, but now he's like a never Trumper. So he's kind of like very establishment. And he was making the point that people only voted for Trump because they want destruction. I also think that's misrepresented. I think that is
that seems like a misrepresentation.
I think that's a current for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely a current. But I also think the border, some cultural issues like around, you know, there's a reason he ran the transgender ads, I think more than inflation ads down the stretch. Like, I think there's some issues that for most Americans, they just totally disagree on. And they're Christian people and they feel like the left doesn't like religion as much.
And dude, manipulative bullshit politics as usual, maybe again, a little more cunning and provocative than usual, but like leaning into these issues that aren't really going to impact people that much.
Yeah.
Like, God forbid trans people have rights and an identity, you know what I mean? But maybe people, which leans into this whole like woke thing and people's rejection of it. I think it all kind of like plays into that whole narrative of like people feeling as if that their identity and the way things work are at risk.
Yeah.
And they've sort of manipulated it.